All right, welcome back, the genius. Okay, so in this section, let's talk about class selectors. Okay, how do we use class selector in CSS? How do we use the class attributes to actually select elements that we want to style? So we take a look at it. So the CSS class selector is one of the most commonly used selectors, allowing developers to apply specific styles to elements based on a class attribute. Okay, so you can actually give the element a class attribute, then you will now use that class attribute, the value of that class attribute, and create a CSS rule in your CSS file. Okay, so let's take a look at the basic usage of class selector. So now to target elements with a specific class, preface the class name with a dot. All right. Preface the class name with a dot. So when you're creating your CSS, making your CSS declaration, all right, when you're creating your CSS rule, you actually preface it with a dot. So here we have a div, and the class attribute here, the value is card. So if you now want to target this particular div, you create a CSS rule that starts with dot, then the attribute name, which is the class attribute name value, which is card. So you cannot do whatever you want to do in here. So let's go to code and see how to do this. So if I come in here, all right, now I will have to clear everything here, and I could also, okay, now if I want to target this H1, all right, I could add a class to it, and I'll call it heading. I could just call it heading 1. Do you understand? So then I will now come to the style, and I will say dot heading 1. Then I'll create my CSS declaration. But for some reason it's giving me, so it's saying do not, okay, I have not included any property here. So I can say color is equal to blue. Like I say, color is equal to blue. So here I have used this class attribute to target this element. So this is why it is a class selector. We are using this class to target the element. So here I added a class attribute and gave the value heading 1. Then with this heading 1, I now created a class selector. So I started with dot heading 1. Then I now create my CSS rule. So if I save and open this live server, you will see that I actually targeted it. I got it. So the color of this H1 now is blue. Okay. All right. So this is how you do it. You actually you add this class attribute, add the value card. Then when you now go to create you remember with this CSS syntax, how do you start? What's the syntax of CSS? So instead of here, you use the card. All right, you use the class attribute value and start it with preface it with dot. Then you now write your CSS rule. Okay, so using CSS selectors on multiple elements, you can actually use CSS selectors on multiple elements. How do you do this? So a single class can be applied to multiple elements. So we one good thing about class selector is with one style, all right, you can add one style to multiple elements. All right. So this makes it reusable and versatile. So it makes it reusable and versatile because you can actually use it to style multiple elements. So example is this. Here we have this first paragraph, and it's an important text one. So we are adding a class highlight. The second one, the same thing. They are using the same class name. Okay. So, and here we are just creating one single class. So I could actually go back to our code, and this heading here, I could actually come in here and say class heading 1. All right. So this element and this element, they are using one class. So this makes this selector reusable and versatile. So here I'm using this class to add style to two elements. So if I save now, the two H1 would be in blue. All right. So I use one style and I use it to target multiple elements. All right. So multiple classes on one element. You can actually have multiple classes on one element. How does this work? So look at it. Elements can have multiple classes, allowing for combination and reuse. All right. So each class is separated by a space in the HTML. All right. So look at it. In this div, we have this class, we have card, and we have highlight. So this card would have its own CSS rule. The highlight will also have its own. So both of them will be applied to this div. So this is what it looks like. This is the card and this is the highlight. So I can go back to our own code. Can go back to our own code and do something like this. Yes, I want this H1 to have this color. I could also create another class selector light. I can say okay, I can give it an italic style. I can just say let me just say style. I can just say style, and I'm giving the font style to be italic. All right. And here I can apply this class here. So I have heading one and I also have style. Okay. So if I save now, so this particular H1 would have the color blue and have the font style of italic. So if I go, I open, and you can see. All right, so those two classes are applied to this element. So this is how you use multiple classes on one. This is how multiple classes can be on one element. You can also combine class selectors. So you can have multiple classes to target elements with both classes. All right. So I can say, okay, I want to target element that has this class and this class. So to do that, this is the example here. The syntax is dot class one dot class two. So I'm targeting the element that has class one and also has class two as their class attribute. So if you look at this button here, this button class is BTN primary. This other one, BTN secondary. Here we have BTN primary, BTN dot primary. So we are targeting here now with this style now, we are targeting this one. Then we have BTN dot secondary, we are targeting the second one. So let's take a look at how it works here. I could say I want to target the element that has H1 heading 1 dot style. So look at it. Remember before this first head one, this is the universal selector. This one was targeted when I was just using only the heading one. But right now, here we are only targeting the element that has the two class. So that means only this one would be targeted. Do you understand? So this one will not be targeted because it will not be selected. We are selecting the class, the element that has heading one and also has style one in as a class attribute. So if I save, you will see that this color will no longer be blue for the first heading one. This CSS will be applied to only the second head one, H1. So if I go to browser, you can see this one was no longer targeted because it didn't match. It didn't match the selector. Okay. All right. So you can also nest class selectors. I can say I want to target the element that has a particular class that is inside a particular class. So to target elements with a specific class, you can nest class selectors using descendant or child selectors. So we'll also talk about descendant or child selectors in the next section. But here, look at it. We have this div, all right, and this div has this class card. Then we now have this paragraph that has the class title. This other one has paragraph class content. So if we want to target this particular paragraph, the class content paragraph, we will say class card. We will say the class content that inside the class. So this is what the example looks like. So there is a space. Now, the difference between this one and the previous one is that the previous one, there was no space. But right now, there is a space. There is a space. So here, we are targeting the element that has the class title, which is inside another element that has the class card. The same thing here. We are targeting the element that has the class content, which is inside. Okay, so this is how it goes. So let me show you example here. So I want to target, okay, here, this is a typical example. We have div. We have this div that has this class div, and we have this class heading one. So I want to target the style that is inside the class style that is inside div. All right, so this will still be targeted. All right, so we are targeting, the difference is that there is a space between. So we are targeting the style inside the div class. Okay, so this style is here, and this particular element is inside this other element. So if we target now, we are still going to get it targeted. So we go to the browser and it is still blue. So this is called child or descendant. So we'll still talk about it in the next section. Okay. So class selector specificity. Now the thing is that class selector has a moderate specificity, all right, medium specificity. So they override type selectors but are overridden by ID selectors. So they are more specific than type selectors. We'll talk about type selectors and other selectors in the next section now, but they are overridden by ID selectors and inline styles. So when I say I have a class highlight, and this is the styles I have here. Here we are styling this paragraph with black, but we are overriding it because the class selector has more specificity than the type selector. We talk about type selector in the next section. Okay, so here they highlight, this one would go. So let me show you an example. I think it will be best explained with an example. Now, I am targeting H1. Okay, I am targeting H1. All right, so I could say H1, and I want the color to be red. So look at what will happen. The thing is this first H1 would be red, all right? But here I'm having this style, which means this other H1 here that has this style as a class attribute will take this blue. Normally, it's supposed to take H1, but because of this class selector has a more specificity, it has a higher specificity than the type selector. So definitely this one would be what? Blue, red. Why this one will not be red? Because the class selector would take more precedent than it. So if I go to the browser now, you can see this one is red. Why this one is blue? Why? Because we are using type selector for this one, for the first H1, and we are using class selector for the second H1. So if I now put another, if I say style, if I say heading 1 here, all right, if I create a class heading 1, remember this other one has heading 1 as a class, so it will override it. Here it will override it. Okay, if I say this is green, all right, sorry, if I say this is green, okay, so now this head class will override this style that we have here because the class selector has more specificity than the type selector. We use type selector to select a particular element with their tagging. We'll talk about it in the next class. Okay, so if I go back now and hope you can see Now, the thing is this, even this one is now having yellow because of what? We have, this guy also had heading 1, so I can just remove it. All right, I can just remove it, and I didn't save. I can remove it, then I save. And if I go to the browser, we have it here. Okay, so that is it. So what are the best practices for using class selectors? Be descriptive. Use clear and specific names. In short, whenever you're naming anything as a programmer, always be descriptive, okay? Avoid too many classes. Don't overload an element with classes. Instead, use inheritance where possible. We'll talk about inheritance in a later section, okay? Now, use reusable classes. Define generic classes for reusable styling. Avoid HTML dependency. Avoid using classes that rely on specific HTML structures. Keep class names related to purpose, not structure. Okay, so these are possible best practices for using class selector. Always make sure you use descriptive names. Avoid too many classes in an element. All right, in an HTML element. Use reusable classes, okay, and avoid HTML dependencies. All right, so thank you very much. Thank you very much. And in the next session, we'll talk about ID selector and other type of selectors, okay? And I'll see you in the next session. Peace.